All right, hi everybody. Today we're continuing on with our marine mammal lecture, and we're going to start off with sea otters, which are the smallest of the truly marine mammals. Males, once again, are larger than females. We see this trend every now and then. Males get up to, around 90 pounds or so. They lack blubber, but what they do have is they have really dense hair. They have hair follicles, 1 million hair follicles per square inch, making it the densest fur of any animal. And unfortunately, because of that, they were hunted to nearly extinction at one point. Their numbers were as high as 300,000 and hunted all the way down to about 2,000. And then in 1911, international agreements made it such that they were no longer hunting sea otters, and they did quite well and did a recovery for quite a long time and were coming back really well. But now the problem is they are on a decline again, unfortunately, now due to an infection, in this case from an organism called toxoplasma, which typically is found in cat feces, and this infection is spreading into the water system and it's wiping out sea otters. So that's the problem now, and they are once again listed as endangered. They don't dive really deep or for very long like some of the other animals we've seen so far. They're short divers, usually somewhere between 1 and 4 minutes, maybe up to 5 minutes is about as long as they dive. They're very energetic. They're small. They lose a lot of energy because of their small size, so they need to eat quite a bit. So they eat about 30% of their body weight every day in the form of eating sea urchins, other kinds of mollusks, snails, clams, and things of that sort, and a variety of crustaceans. And different individuals have different dietary preferences. The other thing that's really neat about these sea otters is they have this pouch of loose skin under each front leg, and they store food in there. So when they dive down and pick up food, they'll tuck it into this little pouch, and they also store a unique rock in that pouch. So sea otters typically grab a hold of a rock, and they tend to favor that rock, and they'll use it over and over again for a long period of time, and they carry that rock with them tucked in that pouch, and they use it as a tool, and they use it to break open animals like clams and things like that. They have really large lungs, which again is something different than many of the, say, seals and sea lions we looked at. They have large lungs, and they use those actually to help them float. And they float on the surface of the water, and they eat that way, and they'll sleep that way quite often, and they'll take care of their baby. Here you can see a baby sea otter being held on to by the mom. They're the only marine mammal, or maybe only one of the marine mammals, to use tools effectively by using that rock. It might be that I don't want to say they're the only one, because I do know that there are dolphins that use sponges, the animal a sponge, to find prey. So there are animals that use some sort of tool in one way or another, but to my knowledge, these are the only marine mammals that are using rocks as a tool, but maybe we just haven't discovered it in some other animal yet. They're also the only known marine mammal that can lift and turn over rocks when they're looking for food, and they're also the only marine mammal known to catch fish using their front paws instead of their teeth. Almost everything else uses their teeth. Sea otters will rest in these big groups up to 100 all the way up to maybe 2,000. And this structure that they form, they call it a raft, and they call this behavior rafting. And often large groups of males will do it, and then large groups of females will do it. So they tend to stick with same-sex individuals when they do this rafting, males with males, females with females, and they sometimes will hold their little otter paws to hold on to each other in this big floating group. All right, next up we have polar bears, and polar bears are mostly an Arctic range, so in the north animal. In the north, much of the ocean is frozen, and so being on the sea ice, that's a marine environment. The males are 2 times larger than the females and get up to 1,500 pounds. They're born on land, and they spend most of their life spent on the sea ice or in the water swimming. And they mostly eat seals that are found on sea ice or that come up to breathe, and they catch them that way. And they are not considered endangered, but they are considered vulnerable right now. So they were once overhunted, the populations rebound, but recently climate change is resulting in a loss of sea ice, and as the sea ice declines, there ends up being less habitat for them to hunt on. And so right now their populations are declining due to starvation, inbreeding, and cannibalism. And you can see one here that's actually unfortunately starving to death, and they get stuck on sea ice and have very few places to go. Now, just to prove a point, anything you look up, you could decide, I wonder if that's true. I wonder if polar bears are going extinct. So I just decided I'd Google it, and sure enough, instantly I found, if you type in Google, polar bears aren't going extinct, or polar bears numbers are not declining, something along those lines. And here you go, I found it. Polar bears, are polar bears becoming extinct? Actually, they're abundant. And this person, Bjorn Lundberg, wrote an opinion piece, and when you then go, well, who's this person? And you look him up, you find out that his education background is in political science. So you find this all the time. So then I decided, well, let's look and see. And sure enough, I actually found somebody that disagreed with this particular opinion piece. And this professor here, Dr. Andrew DeRocher, studies polar bears. Once again, I looked up his educational background, and he points out that data cherry picking, which happens quite often where someone wants to prove the opposite. So they pick certain pieces of data to show you and to prove their point. So you have to always be careful, because you can find anything you want on the internet. You can find that smoking doesn't cause cancer. You can find that climate change isn't real. You can find global warming isn't real. You can find out basically anything you want. In fact, scientists themselves are not always even the ones that are right. So this person right here, this is a famous microbiologist at UC Berkeley. And in the 1980s, he concluded that HIV does not cause the disease that we call AIDS. And he's been proven pretty much wrong in every kind of direction he's went, but he still holds on to that. And so you have to be careful. So what's real? How do you know what's real? One thing you do is you can always look it up. You can see where the citation came from. You can see where their background is in. Do they have a degree, anything in that particular subject area? And do most scientists agree with that view? So when I find something that seems off from that, I tend to look into that more and see if that's sort of the general consensus among published papers in scientific journals. Somebody with a degree in political science is not going to change my view of the science unless they have supporting evidence from other scientists. But that's the problem, is that we can easily be deceived by someone who has no background in that particular area. In the end, the beauty of science is it's a self-correcting system. So even if the science is wrong, the science in reality is not wrong. It's the people interpreting it. And it's just a matter of time before someone else comes along and offers new data. And that's the beauty of how science works. Polar bears are adapted for cold in many different ways. They have large claws for traction. They have white coloration. They're kind of a light cream color that aids in their camouflage from prey. They have 2 thick layers of fur, and they have fat insulation, and they have these really large feet. They're the size of like a dinner plate with these little bumps on them, and the bumps are called papillae, and the papillae give it surface area, which gives polar bears really good grip on slippery ice. And they have really strong hind limbs, and they can grab a seal and pull it out of the water using those hind limbs. The top 4 pictures up here, label number 1, these are all different ways polar bears rest. 2s show polar bears when they're alert or trying to pay attention to something. And 3 demonstrates their hunting strategy, which is they sneak up by the ice and then they stand up and dive with their front body. All right, the last mammals that we'll do as part of Marine Mammals I, the order Sirenia. These are often called the sirens or sea cows. They're also called manatees and dugongs, depending on where you're at in the world. These are a completely aquatic, mostly herbivorous animal. Occasionally they'll eat sea jellies and things of that sort. There's 4 living species and mostly tropical waters. These include rivers, estuaries, and shallow marine coastal waters. They have a thin layer of blubber, so they don't have a real thick layer of blubber like some of the seals and sea lions we looked at, and so they're quite sensitive to cold, and they tend to move or migrate to warmer waters with even slight temperature changes. Many of them are mostly listed as endangered, partially because they've been hunted, and they're a very slow-moving marine mammal that typically will just stick their nostrils up to breathe, and they're hunted as a food source, but they also get hit by boats a lot because they're kind of difficult to see. So boats that are driving by really fast may not see them. They're kind of slow moving. They don't get out of the way very well. So sirens in Greek mythology are thought to be a dangerous female creature that's basically half woman and half fish, that are basically the equivalent of what we think of as mermaids now, that could lure drunken sailors with their enchanting voice, and they could control the winds, and the boats would crash into rocky shores because they were, subdued by the enchanting singing of mermaids. So in other forms of mythology, before Greek mythology, there's an idea that there is this siren type creature, but in the beginning it's half female and half of a bird. So it's a combination of 2 kinds of animals, but it doesn't start off as a fish, it starts off as a bird. So those are the sirens. Now, we're going to stop there. Next up, the next lecture will be on Marine Mammals II. This will cover the cetacea. These are the whales. So that'll be coming up